COVID-19, climate change, and conflicts are worsening global malnutrition in all of its forms and reversing a decade of progress. Here's the stark reality. 800 million people go hungry daily. 2 billion barely eat enough for a healthy life. Over 3 billion can't afford nutritious diets. Children and women suffer most. 150 million children under 5 are stunted. 45 million are wasted and frail. And 37 million are overweight. Women face severe malnutrition, eating last and least. Half of women aged 15 to 49 suffer from anemia, making them tired and weak. Many countries battle a triple burden of malnutrition, infectious and chronic diseases, destabilizing health systems and slowing economic growth. Malnutrition is a global issue affecting both rich and poor nations. To change this, we must revamp our approach to malnutrition and food systems. So what are the interventions and innovation needed to tackle global malnutrition? What political and policy commitments are required, and who will be footing the bill? How can the global community ensure that the UN's 2030 nutrition targets stay a priority? How can key players ensure equal access to healthier diets? The Nutrition for Growth Summit N4G will provide the answers. On March 27th and 28th, 2025, France will host N4G, uniting governments, businesses, civil society, development agencies, philanthropies, and academia with one goal: to strengthen collective action against malnutrition. Investing in nutrition fosters societal growth and builds resilience to disease, and returns are significant. Every dollar invested in nutrition returns $16 to the local economy. The N4G Paris aims to shift mindsets so that nutrition is seen as an indispensable component of sustainable development, essential for human and planetary well-being. Not a nice-to-have, but a must-have. N4G will be a platform for sharing successes and solutions and building commitments for nutrition for growth and nutrition for good.
Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of our interview series as we look ahead to the Nutrition for Growth Summit in March next year. Well, as you've seen from the opening video there, the global levels of malnutrition and hunger are affecting billions of people worldwide. We have seen worrying trends across all levels of nutrition, from hunger to obesity, and those levels have really got worse following the COVID pandemic. Despite commitments from member states to eradicate world hunger by 2030, we continue to fall short of the minimum standards for healthy and sustainable diets. So during this discussion, we're going to look at what we're expecting from global leaders during the N4G summit, what kind of commitments we want to see, how we can mobilize the international community around the issue of nutrition, how we can bring in the private sector and civil society, and how we can get really back on track to fulfill the UN's Sustainable Development Agenda. So I am delighted to have with me three excellent speakers who have been instrumental in driving global efforts to engage stakeholders, to change mindsets, and to make healthier diets more accessible for everyone. So let me introduce them to you now. We have Bria Pont, France's Special Envoy on Nutrition and Secretary General of the Nutrition for Growth Summit. Afshan Khan, an Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and also coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition, the SUN movement. And Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Thank you very much indeed to all my speakers for joining me. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time with each of you to get the lie of the land, as it were. And Bria, let me start with you, because France has very much taken a leading role in the issue of nutrition. It is, of course, hosting the Nutrition for Growth Summit next year. In your opinion, what are the major priorities for addressing malnutrition and hunger on a global scale?
Well, you see, thank you for having me with you today, Shirley. Uh, the main priorities on nutrition, there are many, in fact, but let's look at one figure. We know that one person dies every 4 seconds of starvation or hunger-related pathologies. And we also know that half of the children's deaths every year are caused by malnutrition. So this is basically our priority, is to fight this scourge of malnutrition. And we know that nutrition focused development policies are super efficient and help us foster the resilience of local communities, and then build up on that and continue with proceed with development policies that make development much more efficient, so we don't have to patch the same problem every year. So this is really our priority, is to get the international community moving on that matter.
And really, nutrition is fundamental to those sustainable development goals that the UN have put in place. It really cuts across all those different issues. Just put it into context for us. What's at stake here? How fundamental is nutrition to that vision we all aspire to of a healthier, more prosperous, more sustainable world?
When we look at nutrition, we see it as we should not see it as something which is strictly specific to food specific, if you like. This is something that is intertwined with many other issues, that is cross-cutting, transversal, holistic, you name it. This is a policy that can address a number of problems that humanity is dealing with. And we know that nutrition basically, specifically, relates to SDGs 2 and 3, that is zero hunger and good health and well-being. But we also know that it impacts 11 out of the 17 sustainable development goals. So when you implement a nutrition development policy, you know that you are making a difference in so many different issues, such as health, food systems, climate change, humanitarian affairs, crisis resilience, which shows how impactful, how efficient this is. And it compiles, malnutrition itself compiles with many other inequalities. And speaking of the gender gap, we know that women and girls are much more affected by malnutrition. And so many fields of actions are impacted by the development policy through nutrition, which is, in fact, extremely profitable. The return on investment, the financial impact is very high. We know that it's a factor of 16. When you invest $100 million or euros in nutrition, you get 1.6 billion back in GDP. So nutrition also helps local economies thrive. And we believe this is really key for a long-lasting and sustainable development policy.
Yeah, and I think that point about return on investment is going to be a very persuasive one for a lot of policymakers. One of the things that N4G really wants to emphasize is the power of collaboration. And we know that collaboration between different sectors and different stakeholders is really key to making some of these solutions workable. What kind of innovative partnerships are you really hoping to see?
Well, we do not pretend to reinvent the wheel, but we have a diplomatic tradition in France, which is to be open to the civil society. And we do not believe in a top-down approach. We need to get, feedback from the field. And those who actually bring dust back from the field can give us the good impressions, the knowledge they got locally, which is why we are collaborating with not only the Scaling Up Nutrition movement and its fantastic network of governments, of philanthropies, of business, and of NGOs.
So you're looking for good practice solutions that you can scale up.
Absolutely. And the idea is also to bring them into the governance of the summit, which is why we are really looking forward to the working with in particular the civil society in the summit's governance. And for the first time ever, the steering committee itself includes civil society organizations. So we think it's very important to get their voice and their experience. Also, we have identified a number of occasions where we can beat the drum and try to leverage support in the international community. That would be, I was last week at the high-level forum at the United Nations. We will be back in New York in September for the United Nations General Assembly's opening week. There is also the fall meetings at the World Bank, many other moments, G7, G20 meetings, and of course the Sun Global Gathering in Kigali in November will be a great occasion to beat the drum and make noise and get everyone on board.
Well, it's great that there seems to be so much momentum in the right direction. For the moment, Brio, thank you very much indeed for that. And that is a great moment to bring in Afshan. And as coordinator of the Sun Movement, you've got 66 countries across Latin America, Asia, Africa, all working together to try and improve their food systems and their levels of nutrition. Where have you seen most success with that?
Thanks so much for the question, Shule. And I think what I've seen is exponential growth also in the number of Sun partners over the last decade. So we went from, say, being in 13 countries in 2013 to over 4,000 organizations across 52 countries and a dozen in development by 2024. So civil society has played a very important role. We've also seen the Sun Business Network and the small and medium enterprises led by GAIN and WFP together as a really important factor and component in driving home the nutrition agenda. So I would say we've really seen proven solutions, brokered and supported from the networks. These include things like integrating nutrition and immunization together through strengthened primary health care. Working with Gavi and WHO, Sun has targeted zero-dose children with nutrition services delivered through primary health care. And we've seen this in several Sun countries, DRC, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Somalia, Pakistan. So Brio spoke well about, I think a couple of sectors that are pivotal to nutrition outcomes. Clearly, health is one, but the other is also the food systems. So, breastfeeding for me can clearly cut the chances of a child becoming obese by up to 25%, and we're seeing overall rates increase.
And that's one of the things that has really been pushed in some of these particularly low middle income countries about the importance of things like breastfeeding when it comes to a good nutritious start in life.
Absolutely. And for that first 1,000 days, it's critical. So we've really seen also El Salvador, for example, has increased the number of breastfeeding counselors by more than 1,000. So these investments that are being made by governments, I would include social protection, where Bangladesh has supported a household scheme that looks at monthly stipend, which is increased by 25% if that family spends the stipend on healthy foods. So those incentives to really focus on nutritious food and healthy diets is key. And we've seen it in the school meals, school feeding program as well. So there in Sri Lanka, the National School Feeding Program funded by WFP has really focused on providing school-age children with nutritious food that's locally procured, and again, creating this virtuous cycle of nutritious quality food being procured by government locally, so we create incentives for local producers of quality nutritious food, and then offering resources and employment to families to provide support in those canteens and work in those school canteens. So there's lots of opportunities there through the Sun movement and its stakeholders and partners to really accelerate the nutrition agenda in a meaningful way. And I think as we're dealing more and more with all forms of malnutrition, we have to look at some of the nutrition labeling policies to inform consumers about the nutrition value of foods. So, for example, Zambia, the Good Food logo is allowing consumers to make healthier choices. But it's really important that we also have food environments that are healthy, and those are supported by public policies, by changes in consumer behavior, but also changes in behavior of what's being supplied on the domestic market. So there's linkages between several sectors, and maybe the last thing I would say is the important link with climate, because here we see that there's real opportunities both to improve how food systems are impacting on climate, but also how nutrition and nutritious and healthy diets that include indigenous crops, locally sourced foods for public procurement can also impact on emissions. And I think we should speak about that a little more later on.
Yeah.
There's a huge connect there.
We will definitely be talking about how nutrition links in with other global issues. I just want to pick up on some of the things that you've mentioned, really interesting initiatives and clearly very successful initiatives from a grassroots level up to higher levels. Can we talk a little bit about money, though? Financing is always a problem for all countries, but in particular for low and middle income countries. So how are some countries funding their nutrition initiatives?
So access to finance for nutrition programming is frequently raised by some countries, in part because of its absence creates major bottlenecks in the design and rollout of these multi-sectoral interventions. So I think there's a few key things that can be done. First of all, SUN has been supporting the costing of national nutrition plans. And then there, I think we can optimize what is the domestic budget that's going towards nutrition financing across all the key sectors. Because we know that nutrition outcomes, as Breo said earlier, are emanating from multiple sectors. So that's one. What's the domestic budget that's going towards nutrition, and can we clearly earmark and tag that? And there's been some very successful examples of that kind of budget monitoring. The second is really to look at how is ODA and grant assistance being channeled. And there again, I think having the donor networks in country, led by some donor networks and sometimes alongside UN agencies, gives the opportunity to make sure that the bilateral assistance is also supporting the right areas. And we have seen that there's a big financing gap in nutrition. The estimates are that less than 1% of ODA goes towards direct nutrition interventions. So there's much more to be done there. The third area, and one that is likely to grow, and I hope with Breo's support as well, is the concessional financing that's available to nutrition. And in the current funding environment, we are going to need to see the banks through IDA and as well the regional banks step up their financing for nutrition. There's clearly been some movement there. We've seen African Development Bank, for example, make a commitment to increase the portfolio of investment that's going to nutrition direct and nutrition sensitive interventions. And clearly much more can be done. And lastly, I think there's opportunities for more innovative financing, public-private partnerships, better use of philanthropies to shore up some of the risks of supporting nutrition interventions, some complementary financing, and perhaps even looking at climate financing to see what they can do around supporting investments in nutrition that can lead to better climate-sensitive outcomes as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, but we really need to up our game to meet some of the financing gaps that have so clearly been demonstrated by several of the SUN countries.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's something that we'll talk about in the wider discussion as well. For the moment, Afshan, thank you very much indeed for that. Lawrence, if I can turn to you, we're well on the road to 2030 now. We've seen commitments from governments. We've heard some of the fantastic work that is happening in the Sun countries there from Afshan. Where have we seen progress from? Where are we still have a lot to do?
So thanks, Shuli, and thanks to Brio and Afshan for some really interesting comments. I think you mentioned COVID, Shuli, and COVID really pulled back the curtain a bit on some of the things that we perhaps take for granted, but shouldn't. And I think parents know, for example, that school meals are really important for their kids' nutrition. But when kids stop going to school, teachers stop going to school, everyone really saw the real importance of school meals and school feeding in the UK as well as everywhere else in the world. So I think I'm really encouraged by the new emphasis on school meals and school feeding, not just as an opportunity to provide nutritious food to school-aged children, but to help create an environment where kids learn about food. They learn about how it's grown, why it's important, it's grown in a different way, for the environment, for nutrition, for jobs. So they learn about nutrition, because that's really how to make all of this sustainable.
That public awareness issue that needs
yeah,
to
the
be
summit's
raised.
Nutrition for Growth. We have to grow the knowledge of nutrition as well. I mean, so that's schools. I'm optimistic about schools. I'm also optimistic about the workplace. Lots of people who are employed, I think it's 2 billion people in the world have a regular job. 30% of those are living in poverty, which is a surprising statistic, actually. And if they're living in poverty, they're very likely to be malnourished. And yet employers do very little to improve the nutrition of their workers. And if they did, they would see that it reduces accidents, it improves productivity, it reduces absenteeism, it breeds loyalty, and there's the evidence suggests there's a 6-to-1 return. So businesses actually will see this in their bottom line. And we've had some great programs again in India and Kenya showing that not only are these programs good for businesses, they obviously improve the diets of hundreds of thousands of young, mostly young women, who of course very important to improve their nutrition, but also many of them will go on to become mothers and give birth to children. Where has it all been put together? So I've given you schools, I've given you workplaces. Civil society is very important for schools. Businesses are very important for workplace. Where has it all been put together? And the only place I've really seen it put together is in the Indian state of Odisha. Now, Odisha is 45 million people, so it's a big state. It's bigger than many African countries. And we've seen in the last 15 years, the rate of stunting has halved in Odisha from about 32% to 16%. When I saw those numbers, I didn't really believe them. So we did an analysis of them, and they really are true. And then you begin to ask, well, what did they do?
Yes.
They do. They made it the utmost political priority. They set up a mission. The state minister, which is like the prime minister of that state, said, we're gonna create a mission, which means we can cut across all these different sectors. We're going to bring all the different stakeholders together. It's like a mini sun, really, at a state level. We're going to do that, and we're going to make sure that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So actually what they did they weren't huge changes, but they made them in all the right places, and they aligned them all. So it's really a testimony to the Sun model, but it's also a statement of how important leadership is in this space, because there is no Ministry of Nutrition.
Absolutely.
There is no
political will is going to be the driving force behind any major changes.
But leadership, and wherever it comes from, political will kind of implies it comes from the government, but often governments are just following everyone else.
Oh, that's interesting. I wanted to ask who else should be involved. And I think one of the things that we often talk about is how far the private sector should be involved, because the private sector can bring many things to the table, technology, innovation, funding. From your perspective, how important is it to get private organizations, private companies involved in this?
Well, game works mostly in the food system, and the food system is the private sector. I mean, the government sets the parameters, they set the goals, they draw up the red lines, but it's essentially the engine is the private sector. And when you talk about the private sector, you have to think about it's food companies and non-food companies. It's big multinationals all the way down to micro, small and medium enterprises. So it's a very nuanced landscape. But very often the debate around the private sector is big mega food companies, but there's so much more to it. Most people who are at risk of malnutrition in Africa, Asia, and Latin America get their food from SMEs. Again, we always say behind every plate of food is an SME, right? So they're very important. Now, there are companies that do good things for nutrition and companies that do bad things. So obviously, the first thing we need to do is to stop the companies doing bad things. And that's irresponsible marketing. It's marketing of breast milk substitutes that violate the code. It's the production of ultra processed foods that are rich, that are tasty and cheap, but full of nasty stuff, right? So we need to regulate that. But we also need to really, I don't just believe in sticks, I believe in the carrots too. If we want our businesses to do good things, we have to incentivize them. We can't rely on business leaders, benevolent business leaders, to do the right thing for nutrition. We need to make it part of their core business. So that means ESG standards that incentivize, that build nutrition in to them and incentivizes investors to invest in companies that are producing nutritious foods. It means tax breaks for companies that are producing nutritious foods. It means reducing tariffs on essential ingredients that are imported that are really critical for nutritious foods. Many nutritious foods are degradable. They require cold storage. Much of the insulation material that is needed for cold storage has to be imported. Let's reduce the tariffs on that, okay, for example. So there are lots of things that need to be done. But business has to be a part of the solution. If they're not, we're going to fail.
Lawrence, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you all of you for laying out the landscape there. I think that's a useful jumping off point to get into a wider discussion. So I want to start by asking, for those of us on the outside looking in, there seems to have been a lot of talk about changing food systems, about making nutrition a priority. There's been global meetings about it. There's been resources allocated to it. There's been commitments from governments. And yet that needle still hasn't moved really in the right direction. And I wonder what is going wrong. Bria, maybe I can start with you. What do we have to do?
Well, surely that's the $1 billion question, if you like. Indeed, a lot of money has been committed, and we are following Tokyo summit where $42.6 billion US have been committed, have been pledged, and that is very humbling, but it's quite a challenge. In fact, quoting my friend Mira Shekar from the World Bank, I believe what we need is now not more money for nutrition. We need more nutrition for money, which means we have to be more efficient. And how do we become more efficient? Through coherence. What we are looking at is a sheer number of governments where nutrition is an orphan among all policies. Sometimes mother health or father agriculture is the only one in charge. So we need to put all these agencies at work together. So and we need business units dedicated to nutrition inside the government's apparatus, so that we have unified strategies through robust governance. That is really essential. Nutrition needs effective leadership, and this is what the N4G summit in Paris will be promoting.
I want to bring Afshan and Lawrence in on this. Afshan, you made a really interesting point about overlapping budgets. So you look at a budget for climate, for example, and you say, well, some of that can be used to improve nutrition because growing food or raising cattle, all of that has a climate impact. Should policymakers, countries be looking more into that kind of fund sharing?
You know, I go back to a point that Bria made. Half of the child deaths are still attributable to malnutrition. So we need to see really stronger investment from healthcare budgets in the essential nutrition actions. And that means immunization coupled with, screening and detection for malnutrition. It means relying on community health workers, and that includes paying those community health workers, making sure they have the right data and evidence to collect and monitor the situation of children. So I would like to see strengthened essential nutrition interventions in the health sector, costed into that health plan as a first start. I think we can do far better and far more with supporting those essential actions, including prevention of wasting. There's new guidelines from WHO. How do we implement those and roll them out? And are nutrition interventions specifically costed in healthcare plans? The second area where I think we have to drive home the agenda far harder, that good nutrition is the bedrock on which sustainable development is built, is really to integrate nutrition into the agricultural sector in a far more deliberate way. What can we do? And perhaps Lawrence's example that so much of those who produce food, I'm thinking of the smallholder farmers, are malnourished. So we need to make sure that we're providing either good social protection mechanisms for those smallholder farmers or prices where what they produce is sold at an affordable price for them to be able to then purchase food for that family. So I think that agricultural component where smallholder farmers get the right price for their food and they're no longer malnourished is key. Second, in the agricultural sector, how are we getting food at an affordable price? And there, some of the food subsidies that are provided are going in the wrong direction. For example, we've told people, eat less sugar. Yet sugar subsidies are valued at hundreds of millions of dollars every year, right? So where are we creating incentives in the system for those healthy foods? So there's a lot more that can be done with ag subsidies and pricing policies. And the third thing is our social protection mechanisms worldwide have to be more nutrition sensitive. Lawrence referred to COVID. When during COVID I was working in Europe and Central Asia, they ramped up social protection mechanisms for vulnerable households. There's a possibility to do that in countries to touch the most vulnerable households, and I think Brazil, in their Action for Hunger and Poverty Alliance, is now doing that. And really to make sure that the social protection mechanisms are nutrition sensitive. So we're making sure we're targeting the most vulnerable households with high rates of malnutrition, and we're creating incentives so that those households also have the right knowledge and are incentivized to purchase healthier foods. So there's a lot that can be done across sectors to increase investment in nutrition in a meaningful way. But I would also say that we need not just more money for nutrition and more nutrition for the money. I would say both. Nutrition is an orphan when it comes to development finance. And we have to change that by creating better narratives around what the investment opportunities are and how it influences, as Bria so clearly said, so many of the SDGs.
Lawrence, do you want to add to that? Because there is clearly a huge fundamental link between nutrition and other global issues, as both Bria and Afshan have said, and how we increase that awareness, that education, that knowledge, that in order to solve many global challenges, we have to solve the problem of nutrition.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be a bit provocative, Shuli, and be a bit Eurocentric as well. So the European football tournament just finished here.
That's a sore point for the UK.
And I'm a proud England supporter, but Spain completely trounced England in the final. And why did they do it? The English players are just as good as the Spanish players, actually. It's just that the Spanish players had more imagination. they had more coherence, they had a plan. And I think in nutrition we're a bit too much like England and not enough like Spain. So while lots of other people have to change, we also have to change in nutrition. We have to use more imagination. We have to say to the ag people, to the social protection people, to the climate people, why is it in your interest to invest? Don't do us a favor in nutrition. It's in your interest to do this. So we have to, but to do that, we've got to get out of our comfort zone and make the case. One of the questions or that's always posed is, how do we shift the narrative around healthy diets? Science is not enough. I'm a scientist. Science is not enough. Benefit cost ratios are not enough. I look at the UK. I'll give you another UK example, the post office scandal in the UK. In the UK, there was post office, people who run post offices were put in prison and taken to court because they were accused of cooking the books. But actually it was a piece of software that was messing everything up. So it was a massive scandal, but it wasn't until there was a BBC drama by a famous actor. It punctured the collective consciousness and everyone was up in arms. I've never seen the government move so quickly. So we can't just keep doing the same things to puncture the collective consciousness of everyone around healthy diets and nutrition. We need to think about doing things differently. We need to blend science with art, with logic, with aspiration. So we need to do things differently. We need to have a little bit more imagination, and we need to get out of our comfort zone and make the case. Why is it good for you over there? You think you've got nothing to do with nutrition. You think you've got no stake in it, but you do. And this is why you do. But it's hard to do that, but we need to do it. And it plays very much into the we need to be more efficient about how existing resources are used. There's tons of resources out there in the food system, in climate, in the private sector, in the social protection programs, in the international finance institutions and the development banks. Not enough of it's pointing towards nutrition, and that's because we're not providing the Google Maps on how to do that.
Okay, so we've had the post office analogy, the football analogy. The key is think differently. Brio, in the run-up to N4G, how are you going to get key players to think differently?
Well, thank you for that question. We are ourselves trying to think differently, which is quite a challenge, I must say, in particular for bureaucrats like me. But we are indeed. I mean, what we are looking at is a fantastic group and very inspiring group and very passionate group of people who seem to have discovered a gem among development policies, which is nutrition, but are struggling to make people aware that it works. So we think that it is necessary to engage with a wider public opinion, to let the taxpayer know that nutrition is not only about food labeling and these cool apps with which you can scan barcodes at the local supermarket, but it's also about with a cross-cutting, very transversal approach, making our development policies more efficient. And I think when you speak of efficiency, then you may unlock a lot of potential actions that can be carried out by governments, but also by NGOs and by the private sector. So this is thinking out of the box, means also thinking each stakeholder must try to get out of its own ecosystem and interact with others, which is why at the N4G we really want the working groups and everyone on the way to this summit, because people tend to forget that below the summit there's generally a mountain to climb, and that's what we're doing right now. We need to cooperate between different stakeholders, be them international organizations, philanthropies, NGOs, governments, and companies. So this is our approach, and we also need, and I would like to follow up on what Lawrence just said. It is absolutely crucial to engage with the private sector. If the private sector is not involved in this, if we do not make the necessary efforts to show them how much it pays off to be on the good side of history, we are going nowhere. And we will need also to engage with the public through crowdfunding, but as I said, also through a good communications campaign to show that how efficient nutrition development policy is. If you do something and you don't let people know, you didn't do it. So that is very important indeed.
Okay, so we're a few months away from the N4G summit. Afshan, how are Sun countries preparing? What is your message to anyone involved in that summit?
So for the Sun countries, because we represent an alliance of governments, civil society, business, donors, and UN agencies, it's a unique opportunity that we have ahead of the Nutrition for Growth Summit of more than 66 countries and stakeholders from all these groups coming together in Rwanda at the end of November 2024. That gives us the opportunity to distill what's worked well, where are some of the obstacles, and what are some of the new opportunities, the kind of innovation and creative thinking that both Lawrence and Brieux called for. That global gathering will allow us to distill down some of the best success stories and bring to the N4G new commitments around the nutrition agenda, but perhaps more importantly, new solutions, where we would seek new partnerships and new stakeholders for all the 666 Sun countries present to make sure we get that dynamic and momentum around what's needed to accelerate in the final 6 years before the end of the Sustainable Development Goals. We know we've made some progress. Stunting was reduced by about a third from over the decade 2012 to 2022. So we know what some of the solutions are. And we have this opportunity through the global gathering to really define those, understand them better, and then bring to the table what works with new opportunities for action as well. And that's where I think this alliance of private sector and small and medium enterprises, government policies, civil society, which has been instrumental in some countries on moving the dial, and the UN agencies that are so active in implementing in many of these countries can unlock the door for some of the potential of what can be done through the movement and the alliances.
Thank you. And Lawrence, what do you want to see come out of the N4G summit? What is your message to stakeholders, to other parties?
Thanks, Julie. I mean, I just want to reinforce what Afshan said. There has been significant progress in nutrition in the last 10 years. We mustn't go into the summit thinking that it hasn't happened. I mean, I was really fearful about nutrition outcomes in the context of COVID, and actually my worst fears were not realized. That's great. I'd like to see some very tangible things come out of the summit. I don't want to hear blah, blah, blah. I want to hear actions. Let me give you a few examples. Thinking about what governments can do, it would be so amazing to see occupational safety and health policies. They guard the environment for all the workers in the world. None of them say anything about nutrition and health. I mean, it's extraordinary. They talk about accidents, but they don't talk about health and nutrition. Wouldn't it be amazing if 30 governments embedded nutrition in their occupational safety and health programs? Wouldn't it be amazing if 30 governments minimum put nutrition into their nationally determined contributions for climate emissions and into their national adaptation plans for climate? Go on to the finance institutions. Wouldn't it be amazing if 2 or 3 of the finance institutions, the regional development banks, the IFIs, the development finance institutions, put together a $200 million fund, which would leverage another $800 million, so a $1 billion SME fund targeting credit, not grants, credit to small and medium enterprises that are producing healthy, nutritious foods for local consumption. That would be amazing. Wouldn't it be amazing if 1,000 small and medium enterprises made themselves investor ready for those investments, those loans? One of the problems, whenever I talk to the DFIs, they say, well, the nutritious food SMEs are not there. There's no what they call pipeline. I don't quite believe that, but I think they have a point, at least a part of a point. And wouldn't it be amazing if the big companies, the big mega companies, signed up to a responsible business pledge, where they said, we're not going to target kids after the watershed with junk food ads. We are going to make labels easy for people without PhDs to understand. That would be amazing. And then finally, I think donors are in the hardest position of all of these different stakeholders at the moment, because they are overseas budgets are being used for defense because of the conflicts around the world. They're being used for immigration to house lots of immigrants who are here for valid or not valid reasons. ODA, overseas development assistance, is in really short supply. They have to, I think their job is to maintain and protect nutrition budgets, because think of just one final thing. Afshan said, what Brio said, half the child deaths under the age of 3 are due to malnutrition, and yet 1% of ODA goes to nutrition. That does not add up. We need to make sure that doesn't get any worse.
Yeah, that was an incredible figure, actually, which is quite hard to believe. Thank you very much indeed, Lawrence. The final few seconds I'm going to give over to you, Bria. You've heard the wish list there from Lawrence. In your opinion, what is the biggest thing you want to see come out of the N4G summit, the biggest commitment, or at the very least a pledge that you would like to see made by member states?
Well, my first ambition for N4G is that it lives on. And we know it's a vulnerable process. There have been only 4 editions, and we can already feel donors' fatigue, as underscored by Lawrence. There is war indeed, but we have a war going on, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which had worldwide consequences, unleashing a food crisis, which induced a financial crisis. There is financial resource scarcity, and what we want to make sure is that N4G becomes a tradition, so that we don't have only nutrition for growth, but also nutrition for good. And that's for starters. Second, we want this N4G summit to be a summit where development policies, nutrition as a development policy, is endorsed as a doctrine by all participants, and they make it a universal cause. 3, that we make progress on policies, and that local actors, field actors, bring their knowledge to governments, and that we can have an output in terms of new out of the box thinking policies. And 4th, that of course we gather financial support. I believe the multilateral development banks and national development banks, regional development banks, can also play a massive role. They were quite absent in 2021, and it is our strategy to engage with them and show them how profitable it is to invest on nutrition, not only because of the ROI, but also because it helps improve public finance everywhere. The burden of nutrition is not only a problem of GDP, it's also a problem of massive spending on things that we shouldn't be spending on. If you look at the elders, for instance, 75% of the people who go to the elders' house in France go there because of malnutrition. And this is something that could be solved. There's a heavy weight on social policies. And also, bottom line, it's also because we want a world that is more fair, and that we give everyone a chance to grow up and to help their community thrive. And it's not only about growth and economic profit. It's also about social justice, and it's also about making this world a better place.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end the discussion on. It is about making the world a better place. Thank you very much indeed to all of my speakers. I think what's been very clear in this discussion, that there is still a mountain to climb, but the mountain is climbable if we look at some of the solutions that you've talked about. So Afshan Khan, Lawrence Haddad and Bria Pont. Thank you very much indeed. Just a reminder to our viewers that the N4G Summit takes place in Paris from March 27th to the 28th in 2025. If you want more information about that, or if you just want more information about efforts to tackle malnutrition and food systems, or even just to rewatch this interview cruncher, then you can find that on the GAIN website. That's gainhealth.org, and you can of course follow GAIN on all its social media channels. But for now, from all of us here, thank you very much indeed for watching. Bye-bye for now.